Africology is another term that recently is becoming a kind of a buzzword, because we in the pursuit of trying to be relevant and so on, people would use these terms sometimes very loosely, but to me it means very simple things. It's a duality. One, it's a form of protest to say, what if maybe there is a lot of classic African methods of teaching, methods of sharing knowledge, methods of learning, teaching, producing new information, and sharing it with students out there, and also not just teaching and producing, but even it also brings in the people that are involved in the trade or merchants of knowledge. So people in retail spaces, people in academia, and all of that. So that is just one aspect of what Africology, in my view, does. So it is a form of protest to say, what if there is a lot of old classical African ways of doing this that we haven't brought in to our conversations in the boardroom, our conversations in business schools, and so on. And not just business schools, but in all other forms of forms and places of learning. So I am protesting and saying, what if maybe there is? Why are we limiting ourselves to only using methods that are from other parts of the world and ignoring our own? So that is the first thing. Then the second thing is, it's apart from being a protest, it's also an invitation to others to say, come, let us explore other alternative ways of learning and teaching. Let's find out what else is out there. What else in our way of sharing information and so on that could be useful for the whole world, not just for people in Africa, but for everyone. So whether you're a student coming into Africa to study, or you're an African going into other parts of the world to teach, using the Africologist approach to teaching, and in this case, the question of coaching, then it brings in a different flavor to how knowledge is consumed and also how knowledge is produced. That's basically the whole thing. There's been a whole lot of other thought leaders in throughout the continent who've spoken about this, who are doing some work. Mine is just a contribution through the book, I'm a Cross-Pollinator. So just a little contribution to highlight the concept and to say, we as Africans also have something to offer. We're not just consumers of what is developed in the East or in the West and so on. Yeah.
And within that then, Musa, do you have an example of something that we might want to use in the boardrooms, or that we might already be using in the boardrooms that would be from an Africologist point of view?
Let me take, for instance, one concept. So I got an invitation in 2018, even though it didn't go through. I went through the first round of adjudication and it passed, and then I had to go to the next stage. Some admin issues happened there. Just maybe to share a quick story. They asked me to write 500 words of a concept that I wanted to speak about, something that when I was a child growing up here in Zululand, that for us it was just a way of life that had been passed on from generation to generation. And it was something that I thought, even though this was 2018, and again now it's 2020, it's still relevant, same as it was in 2018, a concept that I still want to pursue. As I was going to share something called Sisa. Sisa is SISA.
Yeah.
Right. Sisa, the Zulu word Sisa. If you're very, very careless with the language, you might say to lend someone, or borrowing, lending, that kind of stuff. But it's much deeper and much bigger than that. let's say, for instance, somebody's starting out in business for the first time. And a lot of the barriers to entry into entrepreneurship is, do I have startup capital? So in the normal capitalist approach to how businesses should get started, we think people need cash upfront for them to get started.
Yeah.
But in the Afrikologist interpretation, in the Zulu interpretation of what would be required if, say, you were starting out in business or starting up a new life elsewhere, settling into a new village, the villagers would get together with under the leadership of the headman, and they would say, we've got somebody new joining us here. And this guy right now, he's just come in, they're new in our area, they don't have a house, they don't have anything. What is it that all of us could contribute to make their stay and their transition into this new life that they're getting into, to make it smooth and comfortable for them, and they're safe and they can look after themselves? So it's not a handout, and also it's not a loan. So what they would do is, one guy would say, I have a cow. Another guy would say, I've got 2 oxen. Another guy would say, I've got 2 goats. Someone would say, I've got some building material that was left over and I can contribute that. And then some guys would say, I actually don't have any material that I can contribute, but I can contribute my time and energy and maybe even skill to help you build your first hut that you need for you to get settled, right? So while you set up in that new hut, then you've got all these animals that have been given to you. Over time, 3 years later, 5 years later, those cows have multiplied. Their offspring become your own. You don't take them back. You only take back the original ones that were given to you. That is the concept of ubusisa. And I thought, in entrepreneurship, imagine if, for instance, I'm starting up a new business or my business is falling apart. So business rescue in the Afrikologist approach, whether we're talking business rescue or we're talking startups, what if maybe we approach things in that way, in a way that is communal, in a way that brings others in a way that says you're not on your own, you know? So, and the whole idea of survival of the fittest in the Afrikologist approach to things, that's not sustainable, because there is no, what happens to all the guys who are not fit to be able to pass through all these hula hoops that we put in front of everyone who's trying to make it out there? What happens to them? Are we saying they should starve and maybe enter the stats into crime and all these things that we say Africa is riddled with? No, that's not a solution. So without sounding like I'm preaching and so on, but this is something that's very close to my heart, as you can hear. But the Africa that I grew up in didn't have prisons, you know, because the social system itself took care of all the stuff, the good and the bad. It didn't have orphanages. There were no orphanages when I grew up in the area where I grew up, you know, and so on. I could go on, but I think maybe that does paint a picture somehow, I hope.
It does, and I'm just wondering, you know, so would it be something similar to the term "pay it forward"? So where, in the gesture of paying it forward, it's that I don't have what I need today. However, I'm going to offer to somebody something, like you said, I can offer my skills today for that person, and that person later might be able to trade much later, or they might offer it to somebody else. It may not even be back to me. So it makes me think of that concept of paying it forward, except there are some principles that are very, very clear. As you say, you know, so if you're given the goat today, the intention is that you would then use that goat so that you would then have babies from that goat. You give back the original goat, and then you keep the new ones for yourself.
And in the meantime, you don't have to beg for food. You get the milk right there at home on your own. So no one is giving you handouts. So
Yeah.
in a way, we're saying a much more sustainable way of living is a space where we actually do not need charity.
Yes.
Because charity exists simply because we've created systems through all these things that we've inherited, some of them that we blindly inherited, never took time to say, but hang on a second, is this really helpful for us? You know, and so it creates all these things that now we're struggling to deal with. You know,
Yeah.
there's a lot of that happening during COVID-19, and I'm sure maybe as we talk, we can share more of those stories about current affairs, that's stuff that's taking place now in that space of social development, as it is called, or I prefer terms like social justice and so on, because that's, for me, that's what's really needed. So
Yeah.
capitalism has its own cousins. One of those cousins that capitalism brings with is the question of charity.
Yes, 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 absolutely. So yes, we will touch on it. You know, we'll explore a bit further in a different way a bit later on in you know, in this conversation.